On today's show, I chat with Nick Morgan of Locked On Nashville Predators to talk all things the best rivalry in the NHL. If you ask me, Stars and Preds, never a dull moment when these teams get together, and I like to think the same of today's episode. We talk about the changes both teams made this offseason, the expectations for both teams going into the 22-23 campaign, and which team we think ultimately is better and will finish as a higher seed in this Central Division. All coming up on a Friday episode of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily in-season podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, credentialed member of the Dallas Stars media, coming to you on this Friday, September 9th. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener of the show, thank you for stopping by today's episode, for making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day. Please do hit that subscribe button if you are new to the YouTube channel. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, you can hit the follow button on there as well. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please do feel free to leave us a 5-star rating / review if you like the show, if you like what you hear. But without any further hesitation, let's get into today's lengthy discussion with Nick over at Locked On Nashville Predators for the third episode of our Central Division preview series.
Well, this week we're talking to more of our frenemies from around the Central Division, and we're going down to Dallas this week with our good friend Dane Lewis, host of the Locked On Stars podcast. Dane, what's up, brother? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Always glad to talk to you, Nick. And I know I've spoken with Ann as well a few times talking about our two teams. And I know this should be a fun episode, as I know we both have some varying opinions about our two respective teams and where they stand in this Central Division that, besides the top spot, seems fairly wide open, maybe besides some of the bottom spots as well.
Yeah, it's kind of, and even then, hey, like Arizona's not terrible and Chicago is terrible. So maybe there's even going to be a fight for like Mr. Irrelevant of the Central Division. But it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because it seems like the division really is kind of wide open this year, besides Colorado, who's going to be consensus locked into that top spot. Would be kind of a legitimate surprise if anybody else kind of won the division at this point. It just seems like there's so much parity, and you know, you had guys that, you know, like the Predators, who were kind of middle of the pack, that actually did go out and address some needs. And you have like teams that were at the top last year, Minnesota, maybe taking a step back in terms of losing valuable players from last year's team. So it really is interesting to kind of watch and look and say, you know, I see Colorado as one, but whoever comes next, I could see that going one of several different ways.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And even on the Minnesota note, I'm excited for my episode down the road with Seth at Locked On Wild, because I see so much hype around this Minnesota team. And not to say they're going to be bad, but a lot of people have them finishing second or even third. And while they certainly could be in that conversation, because I think Kirill Kaprizov is the real deal, losing a guy like Kevin Fiala, I think, you know, makes things interesting for them. Their goaltending situation, also very intriguing, but not just them. I mean, the Blues, the Predators, the Stars, I think all could very well find themselves fighting for a top 3 spot. And, you know, like you said, Arizona probably not fighting for a playoff spot, but certainly not as bad as they were last year on paper. And Winnipeg is maybe the biggest question mark in the entire NHL. So, yeah, never a dull moment with the Central Division, especially, you know, Rick Bowness, former Dallas Stars coach, goes to Winnipeg. So I think that takes them, you know, maybe a step above where many thought they might be at the start of the offseason. But this is going to be an exciting season, to say the least, to see who can fill out these, you know, 2 through 4 or 5 spots in this division.
Well, you mentioned the Stars had a former head coach they now have a new head coach, Pete DeBoer, going there this offseason. I mean, everybody kind of had that same reaction, like, this guy again. How did you feel about that? Like, how do you feel about the change? Do you think he's a fit? Do you think maybe he is the guy that can kind of unlock the combination the Stars have now?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that comes with quite a few layers. I think that one, the departure of Rick Bowness was expected. Just looking back to the way that he was brought on as head coach with the firing of Jim Montgomery back in December 2019, and then the world just kind of falling apart a little bit and the Stars just needing some form of consistency. So Rick Bowness stays as head coach maybe longer than he would have had things maybe played out a little bit differently across the world over the past few years. But regardless, Rick Bowness does depart. He's off to Winnipeg, and Peter DeBoer as head coach was, received with mixed reviews. I know even from myself, I think I was initially let down just by getting such a, what felt like at the time a bland hire just because he was one of the bigger names on the market. And I think I personally wanted the Stars to go with a little bit more of a wild card type pick to spice things up. But the more I think about it and the more I've done research on, former Pete DeBoer teams, the more I get excited about what the season could hold for this Stars squad. You look at, the production of a guy like Brent Burns over the years, especially his time with DeBoer. He had really good numbers at the defenseman position, and Miro Heiskanen is a guy who many Stars fans are expecting to make a jump this season with the departure of John Klingberg. And then the forwards as well have historically done well, not just in San Jose, but in New Jersey and Vegas as well. And of course, there's the connection with Joe Pavelski, who is coming off his best season as a professional in his late 30s. Now he's reunited with his old coach, and both of them still looking for that elusive, first Stanley Cup title. And so at least from a storyline perspective, I think there's a lot of really interesting angles to this hire, with two guys that are connected like Pavelski and DeBoer looking for, their first championship. Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn are needing to have big bounce back seasons. And yeah, I mean, you asked the right question. Is Pete DeBoer the guy for that? Only time will tell, but the more time goes on here this offseason, the more I have time to think about it, the more optimistic that I am that we can see the offense take a step in the right direction, because ultimately that's what the Stars struggle with. They historically have had good defensemen, solid to good to sometimes great goaltending, but the offense has just sometimes been lackluster. And I think the pieces are there. Pete DeBoer and his coaching staff just need to, develop the right game plan and put these players in a position to succeed. And, historically he's been able to do that, especially early on in his coaching tenures. But we'll see if Dallas proves to be the same or if things will play out differently for him this time.
Yeah, you kind of hit on it. So last year's Dallas Stars team, I guess there's kind of a mixed bag. When you look at the forward production, and you kind of hit on it earlier, if you tell me like how the Stars finish and you gave me that roster, I would have been like, oh yeah, like Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, still top of their game. You look at them and you look and say, holy crap, like the Stars were pretty decent despite them being like record-settingly bad. Like some of their like worst years in history. So for me, are they going to have a bounce back year? Like, do we have those kind of locked in? And it's like, okay, if the Stars are going to be good, they're going to need those two guys to step up again. Or is this maybe a sign of the changing of the guard? Obviously Pavelski is kind of at the end of his career, but you still have guys like Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz, I think kind of had that big breakout year. You guys were kind of hoping for him. Is this more of a changing of a guard and being like, okay, the bulk of this offense, the bulk of this, this kind of offensive game plan is going to run through these younger guys now?
I think it's a little bit of both, just in the sense that you mentioned all those young players, Hintz, Robertson. There's plenty of other young talent, on the current NHL roster, but also at the prospect level as well, that I think we'll see, playing consistently in Dallas for the Stars, probably at a top six position here in the next year or so. But also at the same time with the contracts that Seguin and Benn both have, both of them being in Dallas for the foreseeable future and both making, north of $9 million or somewhere in that range. The expectation for both of them is still incredibly high across the fan base and even across the organization. I know within the past few weeks, the Stars owner has been critical of their play, especially with, them still being Jamie Benn, the captain, and Tyler Seguin been an alternate captain for, however many years now. These guys are the longest tenured players on the team and still expected to be leaders to some extent. And as much as they need to produce because of how much money they're making, they're taking up about a quarter of the cap. It's just unrealistic to expect both of them to lead the team statistically, but thankfully that's why the Stars have Jason Robertson, who scored 40 goals last season, Roope Hintz, who, like you said, finally had his breakout season of the NHL world, finally kind of knows who Roope Hintz is and what he's capable of. So it needs to be a little bit of both. We need to see those two guys be the leaders of this team that they've been expected to be for the past several seasons, but they also need to, the Stars as a whole need to usher in this next generation of leaders like Robertson, Hintz, Heiskanen, and even, guys like Dennis Gurianov, Jacob Peterson that play smaller roles on the team, but, their production and their expectations could be on the rise here in the next handful of seasons.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because it feels like the Preds are kind of in the same spot with the exception of they're actually getting production from kind of their prime guys. You look at and you think of like guys like UC Saros or not UC Saros, Roman Josi. There's too many soft J's on this team. You look at a guy like Roman Josi who had the best year of his life, but he's also kind of on the other side of 30. And same with Matthias Ekholm, same with Matt Duchene. Ryan Johansson just, is either hit 30 or is about to this year. And you look and it's like, okay, this is going to be good. Like, this is going to be a good run for the next 5 years. But you're kind of starting to think, like, who's going to be that next tier of player that step up? So it's kind of interesting that, the Preds and Stars, at least on paper, there's a lot of similarities between like the way these two are built and kind of the direction of the team moving forward, where they're kind of at a crossroads where, you have all this talent that kind of defined the team for the last decade or so. In our case, some of our guys are in their prime, but you also kind of have to look down the road and kind of picture this long term. It's like, okay, who are we going to want to start to build around 3-4 years from now?
Yeah, I agree. I think these teams have a lot more in common than they do not, just in terms of, like you said, the way they're built and kind of how their talent is divided up as well, with a good amount of older, seasoned veteran players that can still produce. Some maybe lacking a little bit, especially on the Stars end, but also this quote unquote next generation. So I think that makes things really interesting for both these squads. But yeah, the Stars just in a really weird spot this season. And I think a lot of people are probably putting them under the radar just because, one, they didn't have the biggest offseason. They certainly did make some moves and add some players to the roster, but, nothing is as flashy as what Calgary did or Florida or even Nashville. I think Nino Niederreiter was obviously not the biggest name on the market, but a guy that, a lot of people were having high expectations for this offseason and thinking that he could be a really nice add to wherever he ended up.
Yeah, and definitely we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. Real quick, though, we talked about Robertson kind of coming into his own last year in a big way. Roope Hintz had that big breakthrough year. Who's somebody you think is going to do that this year for Dallas? Like, who is that next sort of breakout star that you think is going to come from under the radar to have a big season this year?
I think the easy answer, and if you ask a lot of Stars fans, I think this is their answer, but I think there's some truth behind it. It's the first round pick from the Stars in 2019, Thomas Harley, who's a defenseman who has had some experience here in the NHL, not a ton of on-ice time just because of the way the lineup was, written up by Coach Bowness. But now John Klingberg is gone, Miro Heiskanen steps into that number one spot, but that kind of leaves maybe a hole or two at the bottom of the defensive depth chart. And I think that is going to allow for Thomas Harley to play the majority of his games this season at the NHL level, and would not surprise me at all if we eventually see him in a top four role. He's a incredibly talented skater and just defenseman overall with a ton of upside. Like I said, haven't seen a ton from him yet. His NHL sample size is still pretty small, but the coaches that have come through here and even the coaches here now seem really high on him. And the expectation is for him to start the season at the NHL roster and, produce, obviously not heavily because Miro Heiskanen is there and he's expected to carry most of the load on the defensive side. But Thomas Harley is expected to take a big step this season. And he's a guy that, a lot of people here in Dallas are excited about. And I think especially this season, Central Division teams will become more aware of him just because they play more games against the Stars than anybody else. But I think this will be his first season where the NHL world and community starts to, get a little bit of a taste of who Thomas Harley is. And I know Stars fans are ready to see that as well, ready to see him take that next step forward.
Yeah, love that answer because I also love Thomas Harley too, in just the small sample size last year. But, in those little spurts, you kind of saw like, okay, this guy is going to be something. And,
Mm.
it takes defensemen, I think, a little bit longer to kind of come into their own than, maybe an NHL forward. But, you saw kind of glitzes of his game there, like little, flashes of brilliance of him making a really good veteran play. And I think you're right. I think if he gets more time, if he kind of builds, to a 20-minute a night guy, I think you're going to see him have some more consistency this year. So same page on Thomas Harley there. Well, I'm going to give you an opportunity, Dane, to ask some Preds questions. But first, want to take a break. Want to mention today's show brought to you by Built Bar and their new Built Bar Puffs flavor, delicious cookie dough. Yep, cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. It sounds like a candy bar, but it is actually a healthy treat. That's because cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. That's collagen protein too, which your body absorbs more efficiently, provides more health benefits, and has a lot of other great benefits for you. So go to built.com to snag a box for you and your family. It'll be a perfect treat. Or you can just find a good hiding space in your house and hoard them all for yourself. Whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat, or you just need to grab a quick bite, Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than a candy bar. So ditch the calories, fat, and sugar, and grab yourself a Built bar. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your order. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, Dane, we talked about your team, the Dallas Stars, here a little bit, and we kind of mentioned it's sort of an interesting thing because there's some similarities between where the Stars are right now and where the Nashville Predators are right now.
Yeah, and certainly do have plenty of questions to send your way about this Nashville Predators team. And the first of those, I feel like this is maybe an elephant in the room type question about Nashville's offseason, maybe one of the more surprising moves, and one that I know Predators fans are, or at least I would imagine, happy about, that Filip Forsberg is back and back for a long, long time, seeming to be a Nashville Predator for seemingly the rest of his career. And I'm just curious on your thoughts on the contract, the length of the contract, and what your thoughts were on him coming back to this team this offseason. Because I know at several points it seemed like he may not come back to Nashville.
Well, it was anxiety inducing. That's for sure. There's a lot of Alka-Seltzer that had to come out of the old medicine cabinet a couple times during this whole process. But at the end of the day, I know you said it was kind of a surprising move. It really wasn't. If you had kind of read, the stuff from Forsberg and the stuff from David Poile, they made it very clear kind of all the way back, around the midway point of the season when Forsberg really started to break through. It kind of became clear that Forsberg wanted to stay in Nashville, that Poile wanted to keep Forsberg in Nashville, and it was just going to wind up being a business matter. That's different than the Ryan Suter, situation from 10 years ago this year, where it was just, the question wasn't money. It was, did he want to commit to Nashville long-term? We didn't really get that with Filip Forsberg. He made it pretty clear that he was willing to be a part of this team long-term, buy in, kind of be the centerpiece. And it just kind of came down to business negotiations. The contract that he got, it was great. If you're a Nashville Predators fan, $8.5 million AAV for 8 years, probably less AAV than he probably would have gotten on the open market. So that 8th year, I think, really came in handy. So that's, I think, a bargain in terms of the cap. And, you get your best forward that you've ever developed in his prime. He's probably got 5-6 more really good prime years left in him. And then, after that, he could still be a very valuable member of this team. So I think the Predators not only, get him locked up in the short term, but long-term, I think you're going to get a lot of value out of number 9. So it was a good deal all around. Glad it's done. Like you mentioned, some tense moments there, but it all worked out. So we can breathe a collective sigh of relief in Music City.
Yeah, it seemed, at moments that there was some uncertainty and just would have felt really weird to see a guy like Forsberg go somewhere else. You mentioned that, he's, really no argument, the best developed player from this organization. Like, if you're making a Mount Rushmore of Nashville Predators, I mean, you have to imagine that he's maybe the first guy on there. So certainly would have been odd. And, like you said, exciting for people in Tennessee, but not so exciting for the 7 other teams in this division. As you said, at age 28, still in his prime. And even when he's out of his prime, I think there's just immense value there in terms of mentorship and, kind of passing the torch on to whoever is in that Predators organization, 5-6 years from now at the prospect level, or even, at a rookie or sophomore level, to learn from a guy like Filip Forsberg. I feel like will go a long way for those players. And moving on to a different area of the roster, a guy that, was having a great year, and then unfortunately things were cut short for him in the long run, and he misses the postseason with the Predators. UC Saros goes down with, I believe it was an ankle injury. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. Right near the end of the season, misses the playoffs. And, from what I could read before hopping on this call with you, looks like there won't be too many lingering effects from this injury that he sustained. But what are the expectations for UC Saros going into this season? Because Stars fans know, way too well the effects that injuries and just wear and tear can have on goalies, with the recent retirement of Ben Bishop, and Anton Hudobin starting to take a step back in his game as well. So obviously Saros a lot younger than those guys, but what are the expectations for him going into this season?
Well, luckily Stars fans also know with Jake Ottinger how much a really good goaltender can kind of right the ship when things are going bad in the point of the season. And the Predators saw that with UC Saros down the stretch. Like, UC Saros is the reason they still made the playoffs when they started having some really bad games in the last couple months of the season. And he is probably to some extent going to be counted on to be that guy again, that sort of game stealer. I think when you look at stolen wins, which is a stat I think The Athletic came out with when Shayna Golden was doing her goalie examination, nobody besides Igor Shesterkin had more stolen wins than UC Saros. And that stat is basically like, hey, the way the game shaped out, the way the analytics played out, like the other team should have won, but goaltending basically swayed it the other way. That's who UC Saros is, and that's who the Preds are going to need him to be again this year. Because, look, as good as the Preds are, and I think as much as they've improved, there's still some question marks about this team. And if you have a really good goaltender like UC Saros, he can be the eraser that gets rid of those question marks, changes them to a nice little exclamation point on your list of questions. So I think, as long as he stays healthy, the Preds are certainly going to be in there for, maybe the second, third spot in the Central Division. Maybe this is the year they finally break that first round playoff jinx that's been plaguing them since 2018. But it's going to rely on him being healthy. And if he can do that, he's still young enough, then I think the Predators are in pretty good shape.
Yeah, certainly you miss him in that first round series against Colorado. I think if he plays that series, that, Nashville, like you talk about the stolen game stat, they probably steal a game or two in that series, but, just obviously maybe that team was great, but I mean,
Colorado team.
It is, but, a good goaltender can, maybe steal you one game in a best of 7 series. You never know. I like to hold to that fact, but maybe it's just me trying to tell myself that the Colorado isn't that good when I, in fact, know that they're going to be a nightmare this season. So I'm just trying to cope with that fact. And, the last thing I kind of...
We can manifest it, yeah.
Yeah. The last thing I kind of want to run by you before we talk about this division as a whole and some potential standings for this year. We talked about one of the recent off-season additions earlier in Nino Niederreiter, but wasn't just him. Ryan Mcdonough comes over from Tampa Bay this offseason as well. How valuable do you think both those additions are to this team? And, I think both of them offer different things, with Niederreiter kind of being in that, prime, quote unquote, prime area of his career. Mcdonough maybe on the back end, but still a guy that's been on a championship winning team for the past handful of seasons.
Yeah. Well, we'll start with Niederreiter first, because I think that one's a little more straightforward. That is a major improvement to the Preds' top 6 compared to who was on there last year. You look at the Preds' 4 best forwards. which are clearly Filip Forsberg, Mikael Granlund, Matt Duchene, and Ryan Johansson. And then you were kind of counting on guys like Luke Cunnin and Ellie Tolvanen to step up and kind of be those support guys for the top four. And that did not happen whatsoever. Now, you take a guy like Nino Niederreiter, who not only had a very good year with the Carolina Hurricanes, 25 goals, but you also look at the way he plays, that sort of grindy two-way game, like super aggressive on the forecheck, creates a lot of opportunities just by getting in the opponent's face, forcing him into a mistake, that fast closing speed, kind of making them react before they want to. That is exactly the type of hockey that John Hynes likes to play in Nashville. And you look at what he's going to do on that second line, he's probably going to play with Ryan Johansson, who is another lanky guy, likes to get in the middle of things, likes to force people into mistakes. You have a very good second line that not only matches the identity of what you want to do as a hockey team, but now with Niederreiter, you have somebody that can score. Like, you have somebody that can go out and get you 40 to 50 depth points a year, which is something Nashville has sorely been lacking over the past couple of years. So Niederreiter, I think, one of the more underrated, perfect offseason moves, I think, in the NHL this offseason. Now, when you talk about Ryan Mcdonough, there's maybe a little bit of nuance to that because of the contract. He's got 4 years left on the deal, kind of in the high 600 million or 6 million a year. So this has the potential to maybe be a burden down the road. Especially because he did not have a great Stanley Cup Finals last year. But then again, who did against the Colorado Avalanche? But in the short term, this is a boost to your defense. Like, this is another top 4 defenseman who is going to play somewhere in the top 5. And so the Predators all of a sudden have more defensive depth. Where he's going to play is interesting because now the Preds have 3 top 4 worthy left-handed shots. Is Roman Josi going to kind of move over to the right, maybe be more of a free-flowing positionless defenseman? Is Ryan Mcdonough going to move to the right? Is he going to pair with Matthias Ekholm? Are you going to put Mcdonough next to somebody like Alexander Carrier, who's a younger defenseman still coming into his own, or Dante Fabro? So it's going to be interesting to see kind of what role Mcdonough has used him. But, maybe this is kind of a burden 3-4 years from now when Mcdonagh maybe starts having injuries or age catches up with him. But at least for next year, I think this is a big improvement for the Predators defense, having him on there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say all the time regarding the Stars, you can never have too much veteran experience, especially when you get to the postseason. And regardless of McDonough's numbers, I think just having that presence in the locker room will probably be, a great thing for the Nashville Predators, just with his experience that he's had over the past handful of seasons. And another guy, the more and more we talk throughout this episode, the more I'm seeing the similarities of getting, an older, maybe overpaid defenseman, because that's Ryan Suter for the Dallas Stars right now. Several years older than McDonough, but still, the similarities continue to present themselves as we continue to talk about our two teams.
Yeah, it's very jarring to kind of see the similarities between the Predators and the Stars pop up, which brings us to a very interesting kind of follow-up topic. So the Locked On hosts in the Central Division voted for who we thought would be like the top teams in the division this year. Obviously, Colorado was 1. The Preds were 4th, and then right after them were the Stars in 5th. You kind of took exception to that, like kind of in a big way too. Like, I think you tweeted out like that it was certainly a choice or something like that. Preds fans kind of thought like, hey, that makes sense actually. So let's lay the cases out. Like, let's hear why you think Dallas should be ahead of Nashville.
Sure. And I do want to start by saying I think both teams will make the postseason. I actually think that we're going to see the same 8 teams in the postseason in the Western Conference. The seeding might look a little bit different, but at least as of right now, I think we'll see, the same 5 teams from the Central, the same 3 teams from the Pacific. But just as far as where they finish in the division, I don't know. There's a lot that goes into it, at least on the Stars end, that I think that they maybe get that upper hand. And a part of it is Peter DeBoer coming into Dallas. Like I said, all those pieces are there, and we saw what some of these young, really talented scorers could do under Rick Bowness, who was playing, hockey like he was back in the 1980s with, a not very strong offensive game and, playing a lot more defensive minded, which is good. But especially with leads, the Dallas Stars were just not a very good team when protecting a lead or playing, with that 1-goal, 2-goal lead, just because they took, the gas off offensively. And I think Peter DeBoer, with guys like Robertson, Hintz, Pavelski, and even a guy like Seguin, Mason Marchment, was a big offseason addition for the Stars coming over from Florida. I think the pieces are there for the Stars to take that next step offensively, not saying that they're going to put up, Florida type numbers or Toronto type numbers offensively. But I think that, you take in their power play, which was a, top 10 in the league for the majority of last season. I think they ended up finishing 11th or 12th. I think that just adds a whole new dynamic to their game. And of course, while recording this, Jason Robertson technically still is unsigned, but the expectation is that he will get re-signed by training camp. And I expect him to continue to produce the same way he did last season at that around 40-goal pace, if not more. And then you just throw in the defense as well. Miro Heiskanen, I think, will take that step defensively and assert himself into the same conversation of Roman Josi, Cale Makar, Adam Fox as the elite defensemen of this league. And then Jake Ottinger in net, you touched on it a little bit earlier about the security that the Stars have in net with him. And then even Scott Wedgwood as the backup, who came in and gave some fantastic performances last season. He's not a guy, Wedgwood, that you want out there every single night. But if Ottinger needs a breather or just needs a night off, I think that Stars fans and the coaching staff and the team as a whole just have full trust in Scott Wedgwood to go out and pitch a good performance, because he went up against some of the best teams in the league last season while in Dallas, like Carolina, Toronto, and really only lost that Toronto game because Austin Matthews is Austin Matthews and, did what he does in overtime. But I just think all around this roster is built for success. And again, it's just going to depend on what the coaching staff can do. And I think we saw even down the stretch last season. And of course you have to factor in some of the injuries that plagued Nashville. I think Dallas, finish the season a little bit stronger, get, snagging that final wild card spot. And again, there is a lot that plays into that. But yeah, I while just purely talking about the Stars, because there was a way that I played this out where I just go at the quote unquote faults of the Predators, but I cover the Stars and I know the Stars way better than I know the Predators. So I figured I would leave the Predators stuff to you and just talk about why I think the Stars are set up for success. And that's why I think that. And I even, have been as bold to say that I can see them finishing in the top 3. I'm not saying it's a guarantee in this division, but I can see a world where maybe Minnesota takes a step back. Maybe St. Louis isn't quite the team that we think they're going to be this season. And you maybe see Dallas squeak into that 3rd spot in the division, but also can very realistically see them getting, a 4th, 5th place finish. But I like to envision them taking a step forward from where they were last season as far as points and offensive production.
Yeah. I'm kind of the same way with Nashville, because when I'm making my predictions, I can see them kind of going up and challenging for that 2, maybe 3 spot in the Central. I can also see it all going horribly wrong for them, which I'm sure you can for Dallas as well. It seems like there's kind of a lot of moving pieces and what ifs that are going to determine how good this team is, because, the way we're each built, it's not like Colorado where you just have a juggernaut of talent across the board. You have some really good pieces, but one of those pieces gets hurt. One of those pieces doesn't produce the way you expect them to. Then all of a sudden you're kind of talking about a very different scenario. And, I see that for Dallas from the outside looking in, and I kind of see that from Nashville from the inside. That there's as good as Filip Forsberg and Roman Josi and Matt Duchene were last year. There is kind of the question mark on whether they can all produce at the same level they did last year, because that's the thing. Like, everybody was talking about how bad the Preds were down the stretch. You still look and you still had 2 80-point scores. You had a defenseman that, I'll be honest, probably should have won the Norris Trophy. I'll just throw that one out there. I mean, when you're winning, I understand like the argument for Makar, and I've said this many times, like I would understand whoever wins, but I think really if you're putting together the best offensive season since Ray Bourque, if Ray Bourque is coming into your comparison, I think you have to kind of be like, okay, this player might have done something special this year. But you have all that. You had a goaltender nominated for the Vezina. And, for them to kind of still fade down the stretch, you kind of think, okay, what were some of the holes in this team? David Poile went out and addressed those holes. Like, one of the big things down the stretch was the Preds were giving up a lot of defensive breakdowns, like 35, 40 shots a game. They added Ryan Mcdonagh to kind of hold down that defensive aspect of their game. What was happening up front? Their depth scoring was non-existent. If Forsberg or Duchesne were off, or Yossi was not quite producing, the Preds had no chance of getting on the board. What happened? They went out and got Nino Niederreiter, a 25 goal scorer, a 40 to 50 point guy. They put him in the top 6. So the Preds went out there and had a very, very good offseason in terms of addressing what were their shortcomings last year. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Like, look, we talk about these players on paper and their fits and everything, but the way the Predators handled it this offseason, it wasn't just like, oh, let's go out and get like another piece. They really looked at their shortcomings and why they faded down the stretch. And they went out and made moves that specifically address those. So to me, like you, I'm going to be like kind of the optimist. I'm going to assume everybody in the teams takes a step forward. I'm going to assume Filip Forsberg, Matt Duchesne, Roman Yossi, UC Saros were the same guys this coming season as they were last year. Now you take that and you plug some of these holes, you fix some of these leaks, chinks in the armor. All of a sudden, you have a team that is not only scary and is going to be fun to watch, maybe kind of a dark horse, like maybe a team that can go out there, pull a first round series win, get into a tough battle with Colorado, and then who knows? That's kind of where I see the Predators this season.
Yeah, I think those are all legitimate arguments, and I agree. I think, especially Niederreiter coming in at a top 6 position fills what secondary scoring void may be, left by the Predators, and I think the Stars did that with Mason Marchment, and I think, with hopefully the reemergence of Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, that, with a new coach, new offensive system, you maybe see an uptick in their numbers. So the best part of all of this is we won't have to wait very long to see how these teams still feel about each other. I know Dallas's first 2 games against the Predators. I believe the Predators start the year off in Europe against the San Jose Sharks, but then they come back to America and get to play their rivals in the Central Division.
Yeah, we'll be in Prague against the San Jose Sharks to start the year off. Good old-fashioned road trip.
Yeah, just your stereotypical, overseas, thousands of miles NHL road trip against the Sharks, who, I would think that's an easy win for Nashville opening night, but I imagine the Sharks playing, on an international stage will want to, have a good showing. So not an easy win, but I think at least right now on paper, you take the Predators there. But then, a back-to-back, home and home split for the Stars and Predators that I know I'm excited for, and, I imagine both fan bases are excited for as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just good to have hockey back, because I think that's was kind of a boring summer a little bit. So it's good to kind of be talking about games again and planning and predicting who's going to win some of these. So definitely looking forward to the season, Dane.
Yeah, I am as well. And, you couldn't have said it any better that, hockey is back. There are preseason games this month, and just in general, a good time to be a sports fan with, football here, basketball right around the corner, postseason baseball, which is wildly more entertaining than summertime baseball. So really just, an exciting time where there's storylines coming from everywhere, but especially as far as these shows go, it's fun to speculate and do these season previews in the division. But at the end of the day, we just want to see these teams play against each other and, bring out the best in one another and give us the competition that we've been used to seeing. And the Central Division is far from being the best division in this league, but I think that they have a great chance to still give us 4 or 5 postseason teams this year.
Yeah, and if nothing else, should be some exciting games between everybody involved too. Even the Arizona Coyotes, who have been Preds killers for the last decade or so. So I guess we'll have to sit back and see. Yep. Dane, why don't you plug your stuff for our Preds fans here? Where can they find you? Where can they listen to you?
Yeah, of course. They can just find the show. You can just search Locked On Stars on your favorite podcasting platform, YouTube as well. Getting close to 700 subscribers. So if for some reason a Nashville Predators fans feel so inclined to help out, they can just hit the subscribe button on YouTube. And I would ask that, Stars fans would do the same for you guys if you want to, plug your show as well. And as far as social media, just at Dane_Lewis on Twitter if you ever want to heckle me if the Predators ever beat the Stars. But know that if the Stars ever get revenge, I may come back.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for that one to happen. You can find us Locked On Predators, again, anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. Be sure to subscribe us and listen daily. Or you can just watch us on YouTube. Locked On Predators is the name of our channel. Again, subscribe, leave a comment on our shows, go through some of the questions we asked, and weigh in. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And me personally, you can find me on Twitter at _NSMorgan. I will probably not respond nicely if you chirp me, but hey, if you ever want to talk about hockey, maybe point out some things, ask questions about the game, I will be more than happy to oblige.
I'm just laughing at least most Stars fans I know on Twitter trying to kindly, chirp a Nashville Predators media member, but I can't see that happening. But I'm just envisioning someone kindly pointing out oh yeah, Forsberg, pointing out the nitty gritty of Filip Forsberg's offensive game or something like that. I don't know. That's just funny to me knowing some of the very active Stars fans on Twitter. Sometimes great and sometimes maybe you just want to block them out for a little bit.
Yeah, if you can come up with a chirp that's you think the Preds are going to win the cup with Forsberg's offensive entry rates like that, then I'll be that was good, sir. Well done. But if you're just telling me, or if you're going to drop the Trashville word or something like that, yeah, you're probably going to get blocked and something personal is going to be said about you. So don't do that. Keep it civil, folks.
Keep it simple and be creative, but in a nice way.
That's the lesson to take away. Well, Dane, thank you very much, man. For the rest of you guys, be sure to check out his podcast, check out our podcast, and we will each be back with new episodes.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's crossover episode with Nick over at Locked On Preds. Be sure to go check their show out. And if you do leave a comment on YouTube, please do be civil. Of course, do love the rivalry, but of course, never want to go at or attack other Locked On NHL hosts because though our teams may be rivals, those guys are my friends and coworkers, and I do enjoy both Nick and Ann quite a bit. Talking to them is, of course, always a delight, and always a delight to talk about hockey as the start of the preseason and regular season gets closer and closer every single day. And you can catch all of the Dallas Stars related news and action right here at Locked On Stars. We are still doing 3 episodes a week up until the start of training camp. Then we will be back to doing 5 a week, talking about the biggest storylines going into the season. And then, of course, games will be here before you know it, and we'll be breaking down those pretty much every night after they happen or catching up from games over the weekend. But thank you guys for tuning in and for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Again, please do hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2022. Also, follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. You can find and follow me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and the show as well at Locked On Stars. Thank you guys again for tuning in. We'll be back here on Monday with another Central Division preview episode. I believe it will be the Arizona Coyotes. That is, of course, subject to change depending on how the recording schedule goes, but I believe that's what you should be hearing next, a preview of the Arizona Coyotes, which we talked about in this episode. Maybe not as bad as we think. But I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. We will see you back here on Monday.